Welcome to our channel, where we explore true crime stories, unsolved cases, and little-known mysteries from across Asia. If you enjoy thrilling, suspenseful stories and want to uncover the truth behind these cases, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our new videos. People still argue about this: what truly prevents a tragedy, our own vigilance, or the responsibility of society as a whole? That question echoes every time the name Aisyah binti Zakaria is spoken, a young woman with a radiant but simple dream, whose life was stolen on what should have been just an ordinary morning. October 7, 2000. The skies over Selangor were calm, neither blazing with heat nor heavy with rain. A quiet morning, much like Aisyah's life up to that point, gentle, filled with hope. She woke early in her modest rented room, her heart racing with excitement. The night before, she had barely slept, her mind sketching out dozens of futures. How would her new colleagues welcome her? What would her first desk look like? Would her parents back home beam with pride, knowing their daughter was finally stepping into the professional world? She chose a simple outfit, with her favorite sea blue hijab, a symbol of her faith and her serenity. In the mirror, her brown eyes shimmered with anticipation, tinged with nerves. No one could have known it was the last time she would see her own reflection with a smile. But Aisyah's story was never just her own. Born in Kangar, Perlis, she was the only daughter among 4 siblings. Her parents, Zakaria bin Ibrahim and Halima binti Hassan, adored her as their little one, but also cherished her as the family's brightest hope. From a young age, she stood out, diligent, determined, never afraid of hard work. Her dream of becoming a computer engineer had sprouted in the quiet nights she spent tinkering with an old family computer, patiently teaching herself whatever she could. Her persistence paid off. She earned a scholarship to the United Kingdom, studying computer science at De Montfort University. Those years far from home shaped her into a confident, capable young woman. Friends there called her Susie, a nickname easier to pronounce, but one that still carried warmth. They remembered her smile, the tiny dimple on her cheek, and the way she made people feel welcome, no matter where they came from. After 4 years of relentless study, Aisyah returned to Malaysia with a hard-won bachelor's degree. It wasn't just a certificate, it was proof of her resilience, her readiness to step into the world. The Pantai Medical Center in Klang offered her her very first job, which she accepted with joy. To her, it was more than employment, it was a reward for all her sacrifices. On the night before her first day, she called her mother, her voice brimming with excitement. "Tomorrow I finally begin, Mama." Halima's heart swelled with pride and worry all at once. That morning, Aisyah left her boarding house with a small bag slung across her shoulder, the click of her shoes soft against the pavement. The cool air carried a promise of new beginnings, and within her was a storm of emotions, confidence, anticipation, and the quiet tremor of someone about to embark on an unknown journey. Waiting for her was bus number W4256, a seemingly ordinary ride, a bridge between her dreams and reality. At first, the bus was crowded, buzzing with life. A mother balancing her child on her lap, an office worker buried in his newspaper, a pair of students laughing too loudly. Aisyah took a window seat, gazing at the buildings slipping past, her mind wandering to brighter days ahead. One by one, passengers disembarked, until only she and a foreign man remained. Before long, he too stepped off, leaving her alone. At the wheel sat Hanafi bin Abdul Rahman, 34 years old. To anyone else, he was just a driver, but through the rearview mirror, his eyes lingered on Aisyah with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He wasn't looking at her as a passenger anymore, but as prey. Unease crept into Aisyah's chest. She shifted in her seat, glancing around, but the bus was empty. The engine hummed steadily, but the silence felt heavy, broken only by his gaze, sharp as a blade, cutting through the mirror. When the bus suddenly veered off the main route into a deserted road, her heart skipped. She asked softly, "Why are we going this way?" But all she received was silence, thick with menace. In that instant, fear flooded her veins. The bus itself felt like a trap, its doors and windows closing in on her. The morning sun, once tender and bright, now glared harshly, exposing her solitude. Before she could react further, the driver slammed the brakes and rose from his seat. His steps were deliberate, his eyes clouded with desire. Aisyah instinctively stood, clutching her bag like a frail shield, inching toward the door. In that heartbeat, every vision of her future, her new desk, her ambitions, the pride of her parents, dissolved like smoke. Inside the hollow bus, her cries for help echoed, but no one was there to hear. Outside, the empty road stretched endlessly, complicit in its silence. Her voice cracked as she pounded her fists against the glass, hoping, desperately, that someone, anyone, would notice. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though fate had answered her plea. For bystanders caught a glimpse of the horror unfolding inside the bus, a young woman struggling, her hijab disheveled, half her body exposed as she fought against an unseen force. There was Firdaus, a teenager pedaling his bicycle on the roadside, Amaral, a man on a motorbike heading to work, Pak Salah, a graying elder on foot, and Insik Roslan, a driving instructor who knew the roads by heart. They were strangers to one another, but in that instant, united by instinct, they could not just stand by. They gave chase. Firdaus pedaled furiously, Amaral revved his motorbike, the two older men shouting for the bus to stop. For a brief second, hope flickered in Aisyah's eyes. She saw them. They saw her. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. But Hanafi saw them too. Panic surged through him. Like a cornered animal, he slammed the bus into reverse, forcing the bystanders to scatter, then shifted gears and accelerated with reckless fury. The engine roared, and in seconds the bus disappeared into the labyrinth of empty roads. The four witnesses, left in a cloud of dust, stood frozen, helpless as the scene slipped beyond their reach. Inside, the walls closed in on Aisyah. She tried to resist, tried to scream, tried to claw her way free. Every ounce of strength she had was poured into the fight. But she was small, slender, and utterly alone against a man nearly twice her size. Her hijab, once a symbol of comfort and dignity, was ripped from her, twisted into a weapon. In Hanafi's hands, it became a noose. The world spun violently as he tightened it around her neck. She gasped, choking on her own breath, the edges of her vision darkening. And in those final moments, she thought of her family, her mother's gentle voice, her father's quiet pride. She fought until the last flicker of life left her body, until silence consumed her. Later, when investigators examined her, they counted 44 injuries across her body. Each mark told a story of resistance, of courage in the face of cruelty. Aisyah had not surrendered quietly, she had fought until the end. News of the discovery spread quickly. Her lifeless body was found abandoned near a construction site, the hijab that had once framed her smile now cruelly tied around her throat. The tragedy shook Malaysia to its core. A young woman, educated abroad, poised to begin her career, stripped of her future in the most brutal way imaginable. The investigation began swiftly. Witness testimonies painted a clear picture, a young woman inside a bus, struggling, crying, calling for help. It didn't take long for police to trace the driver. Just 10 days prior, the bus company had hired him. His name was Hanafi bin Abdul Rahman. When officers pulled him in, the truth of his past surfaced, and it sent waves of outrage across the nation. He was not a first-time offender. In 1988, he had been convicted of raping his ex-wife. Years later, in 1996, he was sentenced for armed robbery that left someone injured. He had already spent time in prison, yet somehow found his way back behind the wheel of a public bus. It was a revelation that stung. The question everyone whispered was simple but devastating. How could a man with such a history be entrusted with passengers' safety? Had the system failed Aisyah long before that morning ever came? When confronted, Hanafi first confessed. But soon, he shifted his story, weaving a desperate, flimsy lie. He claimed Aisyah had stepped off the bus before reaching the final stop, and that another man, a male acquaintance, he insisted, was the one still on board. But his web of deceit unraveled almost instantly. DNA evidence matched him precisely. The belongings found on him linked back to Aisyah. And those 4 witnesses, who had risked themselves to intervene, stood firm in their accounts. Piece by piece, the truth crushed every attempt at denial. The trial that followed was one of the longest and most closely watched in Malaysia's history. 62 days. 55 witnesses. Each day, the courtroom filled with journalists, citizens, and Aisyah's grieving family. Her parents sat in silence, their faces carved with pain yet steady with resolve. They had already lost their daughter, but they would not lose her justice. When the prosecution revealed the details of Aisyah's final hours, gasps rippled through the audience. Some wept openly. Others turned away, unable to hear the cruelty described aloud. It wasn't just a crime, it was a scar carved into the collective memory of a nation. In April 2002, the verdict came. The judge's voice was steady as he pronounced the sentence, death. For a brief moment, the air in the courtroom seemed to release, as if the whole country had been holding its breath. Justice, at least in its legal form, had arrived. But justice did not erase grief. It did not bring back the daughter who had once laughed so easily, or the young woman who had returned from England with pride in her eyes. Her family left the courthouse with heavy hearts, carrying both the relief of accountability and the unshakable weight of loss. Across Malaysia, people continued to speak her name. Some called it the Nirbhaya case of Malaysia, drawing a haunting parallel to the infamous tragedy in India years later. Politicians spoke, including then Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, condemning the act and urging reforms. Conversations spread across households and workplaces. Were public buses safe? Should tinted windows be banned so outsiders could see inside? Could simple changes protect lives? And yet, beneath all those questions lay one unbearable truth. Aisyah had done everything right. She had studied, she had worked, she had lived with kindness. On that morning, all she had done was board a bus to her first day of work. Her only mistake was crossing paths with a man who should never have been there. Even after the trial ended, the echoes of Aisyah's story lingered everywhere, on television screens, in newspaper headlines, and in the hushed tones of late-night conversations. People wrestled with the same uneasy thought: if someone like her could fall victim on what should have been a safe, ordinary ride, then no one was truly untouchable. For women in particular, the tragedy became a mirror of their own daily anxieties. Boarding a bus, hailing a taxi, walking home after dark, suddenly, all of these ordinary acts carried a shadow of dread. Mothers warned daughters, friends checked on one another, strangers looked twice at drivers they might otherwise have trusted without thought. Aisyah's story was not just her family's grief, it became every woman's silent fear. At her funeral in Kangar, hundreds gathered. Friends from her university years, neighbors from her childhood, and strangers who had only known her name through the headlines all stood side by side. The imam's voice trembled as he led the final prayers. Her mother clutched a photo of her smiling daughter, while her father, stoic on the outside, looked years older than his age. In the stillness of that day, the world seemed to pause, acknowledging the unfairness of it all. The government, shaken by the outcry, began exploring reforms. Suggestions poured in: stricter background checks on drivers, more surveillance on public transport, and most notably, a ban on buses with tinted windows. Many argued that if bystanders had been able to see clearly inside, they might have intervened earlier, and Aisyah's fate could have been different. Civil groups organized vigils, holding candles in memory of Aisyah and calling for safer streets and safer rides. Her name became a rallying cry, her story a warning carved deep into the public consciousness. Some newspapers began referring to her simply as Susie, the affectionate nickname given by her friends abroad, as if to remind readers she was not just a victim, but a person with dreams, laughter, and a future that deserved to unfold. But beneath the policies and protests lay something more intimate, the unhealed wound of her family. Her siblings, once lively and loud, fell quiet in the months that followed. Her mother confessed in interviews that the sound of buses on the street would send shivers down her spine. Her father admitted that he still set a place at the dinner table for her, out of habit, before realizing she would never come home. The witnesses who had tried to save her carried their own burdens. Firdaus, the boy on the bicycle, told reporters he wished he had been stronger, faster. Amrul admitted he replayed that morning in his head every night, thinking of what else he could have done. Pak Salah and Insik Roslan, the older men who had shouted for the bus to stop, lived with the bitter knowledge that their courage had not been enough. They were hailed as heroes by the public, but inside, each of them bore the guilt of arriving just a step too late. For society, the case left behind an uneasy lesson: evil does not always appear in shadows. Sometimes, it sits quietly behind the wheel, wearing a uniform of trust. The fact that Hanafi had already been convicted of serious crimes but was still able to secure a job driving a public bus forced many to question the cracks in the system. If safeguards had been stronger, Aisyah might have been alive. And yet, even as reforms were debated, the deeper truth remained harder to swallow. Aisyah had done nothing wrong. She had lived as she was taught, to study, to work hard, to treat others with kindness. That morning, she had simply boarded a bus, the same action millions perform every day. The crime was not hers to prevent. The responsibility had never belonged to her, but to the structures meant to protect her. Years later, her name is still spoken. Sometimes in classrooms, when teachers remind students of why laws must exist. Sometimes in the quiet moments between friends, warning each other to stay vigilant. And sometimes in whispered prayers by her family, who refused to let her memory fade. People still debate what her death signifies. Was it a failure of one man's conscience, or of an entire society's oversight? Was it fate, or was it negligence dressed as inevitability? Those debates may never find resolution. But what remains certain is the image of a young woman, dressed simply, carrying her hopes into a new day, never suspecting that the world could turn against her so cruelly. Aisyah binti Zakaria's story is not just about loss. It is also about resilience, the resilience of a family who sought justice despite their grief, of bystanders who risked themselves to intervene, of a nation forced to confront its blind spots. Her death became a catalyst for conversations Malaysia could no longer avoid. And in that way, she did not vanish completely. Her life, though tragically cut short, continues to echo as a reminder: safety is not a privilege, it is a right. Aisyah's stolen future compels us all to ask harder questions, to demand stronger protections, and to see every passenger, every daughter, every sister, not as faceless commuters, but as lives worth safeguarding. She had dreamed of building systems with her computer science degree, systems of logic, of protection, of order. Perhaps, in a way, her legacy still builds a different kind of system, one where her story urges us to design a world less vulnerable to predators, more just to its people. And though her laughter no longer rings in her family home, and though her seat at the table stays empty, Aisyah's memory endures, etched in every call for safer buses, in every vigil's candlelight, and in the collective determination that no other young woman should ever have her dreams stolen on a morning bus ride again.